If you've got legal issues, call Doyle Weaver, the Hill Country Lawyer, 792-5842. And now your host for the Hill Country Lawyer, Doyle Weaver.
Good morning. Welcome to Hill Country Lawyer. I am Doyle Weaver, and I'm here this morning with our special guest, Mike Hayes. Mike Hayes is the acting city attorney for Kerrville. And good morning, Mike.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Mike, why don't you kind of fill the people in on who you are, where you're from, where you've been?
Okay, we got to Kerrville about 8 years ago from Houston. I grew up in San Antonio. We always talked about retiring in the Hill Country. I was in Houston for about 3 years, which was my wife's hometown, and commuting and dealing with the traffic and the issues that go along in huge cities. This job came open here, and we thought, let's do that, kind of a leap of faith. Let's go to Kerrville. And so again, we've been here for about 8 years. We got here a couple weeks, and my wife said, I'm never leaving. So that's where we are.
Okay. And where did you go to school?
I went to undergrad at the University of Texas and went to law school at St. Mary's in San Antonio.
Oh, okay, good. And I suppose that you practiced law before you came to Kerrville. So was that like an administrative law or municipal law?
I did. I started out the last year of law school. I clerked for a firm in San Antonio that did civil rights work for cities, defending cities, and I really liked it. And I thought that would make a really good career as a lawyer. So we went out to El Paso. I was in the El Paso City Attorney's Office for about almost 5 years. El Paso, as everyone knows, is very far away from the other parts of Texas. And again, I grew up in San Antonio. We loved the Hill Country, so just the distance alone made it where we wanted to get back someday. And so we did, and so we moved to Houston. I was with a law firm there in Houston that represented at the time about 30 or so cities, and it was great. You worked with cities on a daily basis. The issues were varied. The killer thing was the 45-minute commute and then the night meetings. There were some weeks where I would put the kids to bed on a Sunday night, and I might not see them awake until Friday morning. Mm-hmm. So again, this job, the assistant city attorney job, actually came open here, and I knew the city attorney, and I thought, what the heck, let's try to make that work. And we did, and again, it was a leap of faith. And about 6 months into this job, or the assistant city attorney job, he came into my office one day and said he was leaving. And so I'd been here again about 6 months, and so after a year in Kerrville, I was appointed the city attorney.
Okay, good. All right, folks, that's where your city attorney came from and where he's been for the last few years. And we're going to talk this morning, I think, about several issues involving the city attorney. I think what we want to try to do this morning, Mike, is let the people get an understanding of what the city attorney does for the city of Kerrville. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss, I think you can break it down into two broad categories is what the city attorney does, and that would be on the prosecution side as the city attorney, and then on what I call the risk management side of the city attorney. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the prosecution side of the city attorney's job, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Hill Country Lawyer. I am Doyle Weaver, and I'm here with our special guest this morning, Mike Hayes, who is the Kerrville City Attorney. And what we're going to talk about now is I think there's two categories that the city attorney functions in as the city attorney for the city of Kerrville. And one of those categories, I believe, is, in my opinion, would be prosecution. And he is a prosecutor, but I think it's important that the people understand what he does prosecute and what he does not prosecute. Let me just talk about what he doesn't prosecute. There are, in Kerrville itself, we have overlapping district attorneys, or what we call the felony courts. There are 4 classes of felonies, first degree, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree. And all of those felony cases are prosecuted in the district attorney's office, and that wouldn't be a job for the city attorney. Then we have what we call misdemeanors. We have 3 classes of misdemeanors, which is A, B, and C. A and B are the highest degrees of misdemeanors, and they include what's subject to what we call jail time in the Kerr County Jail, incarceration of some kind. And then we have what's called a Class C misdemeanor. Now, typically, the A and B classes, which could include jail time, are prosecuted by the county attorney. Your county attorney now is Rob Henneke, and he's the one that prosecutes, and we've had him on this program before, and he prosecutes the A and B class of misdemeanors, which include jail time. But then we have another class of misdemeanor, which doesn't include jail time, which does include fines and fees, and that Class C misdemeanor is typically prosecuted by the city attorney, and that's because most Class C misdemeanors are usually traffic tickets and violations of city ordinances. And Mike, what I'd like you to do is, if you could, explain the process of prosecution of Class C misdemeanors or traffic tickets. How does that work? Who does that? And fill us in on what goes on.
Okay. You're right. It's all Class C in municipal court. It stems from traffic citations to zoning violations, high weeds. Eventually, we'll get back into we're limiting the amount of water that you can use on your lawn, your garden. And so if you're issued a citation for those types of offenses, it will make it into our court. Council was gracious enough, 7, 8 years ago, to allow me to hire a prosecutor that handles all of the prosecution in municipal court. And our current prosecutor is Heather Stebbins, and she has an office in City Hall, but 2 days a week she's over in municipal court. And I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but I think they probably average between 200 and 300 citations per month. And so she has a docket on Wednesdays that handles most of the traffic citations. And then kind of interspersed to that, she has some juvenile issues as well. If you're late for school for a number of times, or you don't go to school and they charge you with truancy, which is not the current term anymore, but you'll eventually make your way into our court. And Heather does a great job working with the schools on trying to help kids as to, why are they being late or those type of things. And that's really what we try to do in municipal court. Traffic citations are different. We really take those and, you're either speeding or you went through a red light or you didn't. Code enforcement violations or even the truancy, we really try to work with the owner or with the person who's been cited as to, hey, what's really going on? Oftentimes in code enforcement citations, there's an issue with they haven't been in town, so they couldn't mow the grass. And so we'll give them some leniency. Now, if it happens more and more, or again, then yeah, we'll go ahead and prosecute them. But it really is a kind of a give and take with respect to the code enforcement side of the citations.
Right. And so the city attorney really is enforcing, in the prosecution side, enforcing both state law and municipal ordinances, in that sometimes we have code enforcement that are ordinances passed by the city of Kerrville, but most of the traffic tickets are actually state law.
That's correct. That's correct.
And so state law violations of traffic ordinances in the city of Kerrville as Class C misdemeanors, that's the job of the city attorney to prosecute.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk a minute about the juvenile side.
Okay.
Because we also have what we call a juvenile court that Rob Henneke handles, can you explain the differences between what Rob Hennige's doing with the juvenile court and the differences between the juvenile side and the city of Kerrville?
Well, again, in juveniles, our juvenile docket is really geared toward those folks who are, again, it's all Class C. It's missing school for truancy. We have some simple assaults. Simple assaults are, a push and a shove, nothing that leaves really any sort of permanent injury or even an injury that lasts more than a few hours or a day or two. And it all depends on how the police officer cites it, describes the violation on the citation. And so again, we have a couple juvenile dockets every week in court, and it's I think Heather enjoys it in the sense that she really tries to make a difference in these juveniles' lives. If you're getting in trouble at school, if you're not getting to school on time, if you're cutting class, Heather wants to know really why that's going on. There's something at home that's problematic, and we work with the judges. The judges are attuned to this. The judges don't want to fine kids. I mean, they really don't. They want the kids to go to school, and they want the kids not to hurt each other, and they want the kids to follow the school rules. But the judges aren't here to, fine kids, because ultimately either the kid's going to pay or not pay, or it's going to be put upon the parents.
And I'm glad you mentioned the judges, because I want people to understand that the judges are municipal judges. I believe there's two of them.
There are.
Mark Prislovsky and
Pat
McGuire.
Right.
And they're not associated with the court downtown on Main Street. Has nothing to do with the county court at law or the county court, and nothing to do with the district court. These are our own separate municipal judges that handle all the cases that the city attorney prosecutes.
Right. They're appointed by council.
Okay.
And they do a terrific job. I know that they're both passionate, again, about trying to figure out the root of what's going on in a juvenile's life. They will spend sometimes an inordinate amount of time, oftentimes behind closed doors, with the juvenile and the family of the juvenile, say, hey, really, what's going on here? I don't want to see you in court. And I know they both say, this is the start of a criminal, career is not the right term, but this is the first step in a path, right? And let's get it solved now, because the next step may be where you're actually being sent away to serve time. And so, and again, we don't deal with jail sentences in municipal court for Class C. And so I think it's the whole process, and whether it's Heather and the prosecutor or the judges, I think we're all there trying to figure out, particularly with juveniles, let's try to make this a better community.
And I think that's a real important, because if we can prevent some of these young people from getting into the habit or the patterns or the pathway that's going to lead them to increasingly more higher levels of crime,
right,
then we've saved the city a lot of money,
right,
and we've helped some people out.
Good point.
So when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Mike Hayes, your city attorney for the city of Kerrville, and we're going to talk about the other part, or the other category that the city attorney handles in Kerrville, and I call it risk management. But we'll be back in just a moment. We'll take a break, and we'll be back with Mike Hayes. Welcome back to Hill Country Lawyer. I am Doyle Weaver, your host, and I'm here with our special guest, Mike Hayes, who's the city attorney for the city of Kerrville. And we've been talking, introducing you to Mike Hayes and what the city attorney does here for you in the city of Kerrville. And we're going to continue that conversation. And the topic for this segment is going to be what I call risk management, because the city attorney's job is to advise city council. Hopefully, what this does is keep the city council and the city employees from engaging in behaviors or operations that may end up in some kind of lawsuit, which would cost you, the taxpayer, lots of dollars down the road, because it's always easier to prevent litigation than it is, or I should not say easier, I should say less costly to prevent litigation or avoid it than it is to engage in it, because it becomes very expensive. So let's go back to that topic, Mike, and tell us what you do as a risk manager for the city of Kerrville.
All right, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. And risk management is a big part of what I do. I think that's the benefit of having me in City Hall. I get people into my office all the time. Sometimes I have to tell them that's a policy decision. You need to go take that to the city manager. I'm pretty cognizant and pretty reluctant to get involved in policy matters. That's other folks' job. But I'm really there, like you said, to assess risk. And at times I have to tell people no. You know, the law doesn't allow you to do that, or the law would prohibit you from doing that to the extent that you want to do it that way. So let's figure out another way to do it. And so there's some analysis. And I think, you know, when you go to law school, I remember I had a professor that said, you know, we're trying to teach you how to think like a lawyer. And I used to kind of brush that aside at the time. But I think I've really gotten into that mode. And so it transcends into home life too. My wife will talk to me about stuff, or my kids will. And I'm always kind of still in that lawyer mode. And I'll say, but you're not telling me the full story, so I need to know this, 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 and this. And they'll tell me, quit acting like an attorney. You're at home now. But it really is. You know, you try to get all the facts. Then you go to the books. Hopefully there's pretty clear statutes, or there's a pretty clear ordinance that I've written on point that says, hey, this is what we can and can't do. And then you hopefully articulate that very clearly to my client. My client is the city being represented by council, not an individual council member, but council as a whole. So occasionally I'll have a council member who says, we need to do this. And I'll say, well, then you all need to vote that into practice. You need to vote that policy into practice, because I can't take direction from just an individual council member.
Right. And I suppose, and maybe you can answer this question, I know you're not the city manager, but I suppose the city of Kerrville does have some kind of liability insurance policy that they carry. And I would think that the level of representation of a city attorney that the city has would be directly effective on the premiums the city might have to pay for that liability policy. Would that be a good assumption?
It does, of course. It's just like car insurance. The more accidents you have, the higher rates you pay. And that's what, you know, if you think about it too much, that's what keeps me up at night. I try to, you know, again, manage the risk. It's all about managing the risk. And some risks are worth taking. We don't have to have a police department, for instance. If we didn't have a police department, none of our officers would get sued. But the benefit to having a police department is, I think we all agree, is great, certainly greater than the risk. And so, again, whether it's the police chief or the city manager or, the Mindy Wendley in the Main Street program, who comes in and says, hey, this group wants to rent the city's streets for this purpose, what do you think? And it's, you know, we have contracts in place. Yes, we like to have insurance coverage, and we know the limits of our insurance coverage. As a governmental entity, we've got built-in immunities. You know, you really can't sue the king. That's been brought down from the English common law. That's not the case so much anymore. You can sue the king, but the liability is capped to a certain extent. And so we have some built-in protections, but again, it's better. I think you touched on this earlier. My belief is if you're litigating anything, both sides have already lost.
Right. Yeah, the cost of litigation is so exhaustive, really. I mean, you just no telling where it can go. So anything you can do to prevent even getting into the courtroom is money well spent. And I think, just as my opinion is, that if we're going to have a city and we're going to have a properly run city, we need a city attorney who's going to be doing that job. And I think you're taking care of that position very well for the city of Kerrville right now. And I don't think that we should take that lightly. Sometimes it's easy to look at if somebody's doing their job and there aren't any problems being created because they're doing their job. It looks like maybe you don't need them, but that's not true. You do need them, and that's the reason you're not having problems is because you have somebody out there in the forefront doing the job that needs to be done. So
I'm going to need you to tape this.
Yes.
And I'm going to need to take this home.
Well, when we come back, we'll finish up with Mike Hayes, city attorney here in Kerrville, Texas. We'll take a break. Welcome back to Hill Country Lawyer. I am Doyle Weaver, your host, and I'm here with Mike Hayes, the city attorney for the city of Kerrville. And Mike, we just have a few minutes before we go, but I got a little personal curiosity myself I want to ask you about.
Okay.
It's kind of a little, I don't mean to drop one on you here,
Yeah,
but
thanks. Here it comes.
what are these cameras on the light post at the red lights?
Okay, that's a misnomer. They're not cameras.
Ah, okay.
They are just sensors. They used to put the sensors in the ground, and so you run over it. And I think there was some maintenance issues with those, and so now they have these cameras that actually, send out some sort of detection device or a signal. And so when it detects a car at the intersection, it runs through the cycle and it knows it's got to eventually turn green.
Oh, well, I'm glad I asked that question.
Right.
Because when I go up to North Richland Hills to see my oldest son, they actually have cameras.
Right.
And, there's some of those roads up there are 6-lane, 45 miles an hour, and they got red lights
Right.
on them. And so you're always having to make the decision whether to go through the yellow light or try to stop.
Right.
I mean, this happens all the time, and
Right.
I've done it, and flash.
Right.
They flash. I've never got a ticket in the mail, so I guess I'm doing it right.
Right.
But they look exactly like these sensors you're talking about, so I was just curious if those were actually cameras that we had to be concerned about. But good to know. Hopefully
Right.
that answered the question for some people out there. Those aren't cameras. Those are sensors for who's at the traffic light.
Right.
That's all the time we have for today, and I want to thank you for joining us here at Hill Country Lawyer, and thank you, Mike, for being our guest.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have you back soon to and let the people of Kerrville know what the city attorney's doing.
Good.
Thank you very much.